Look, man, you got to do it. He's slowing us up.
We can still make it.
Nah, man, no. Look, it's you and I are gonna die here, or him.
Dude, he's family for both of us.
I don't care, man.
I'm not gonna do
Look,
this.
You gotta think about the group, and you gotta think about these guys coming after us. If you don't take them out, I'm going to. Give me the gun.
No, you're not.
Give me the gun.
No, you're not.
Then you better do it. You better do it now. Now! Now! Do it!
What? You would actually shoot me?
What were I supposed to do?
Not shoot me?
And do what?
Hide me.
There's no time to hide you, man. I mean, we got to take care of the people in the camp. If they find you, you're a risk, you're a threat to the group.
It's greater
You're a
good,
threat.
man. Greater good.
You know, you'd risk our lives to save your own. That's what you're saying. You're injured. We're not. Sorry.
Greater good.
Greater good. Gotta look out the team.
Your greater good sucks.
And we're back, and today we're joined by Shanna and Josh from conflictedthegame.com. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us.
You bet, Chris. It's great to be here.
I think by now that a good portion of our followers have seen your games, conflictedthegame.com. Again, you have 10 of these decks. You've got a board game that goes with it. You have more decks in development. But let me just briefly tell our audience how we came across this. Shanna brought this to our attention, and my initial reaction was, oh, this is novel, a novel idea, a novel game. And then I started studying it more and immediately thought to myself, holy cow, this has got Mike Sterling written all over it. So Mike is our in-house mad bomber, counterterrorism subject matter expert and stuff like that. So I mentioned it to him. We had a discussion. And the reason that I thought of Mike is because he's always preaching the value of doing reps and being prepped in advance. And he's always preaching the benefits of stress inoculation. So training with weapons, such a high stressful level that God forbid, but if you really find yourself on the X, it's a walk in the park. And I made a comment to him that I kind of felt like this was mental stress inoculation, the opportunity to consider some crazy post-apocalyptic situations and what would you actually do. And then, of course, the three of us had a conversation, and you mentioned another aspect to it that it's a great way to vet people to see where their head is on various things. And when I mentioned that to Mike Sterling, that caught his attention more than anything. He's big into MAGs, mutual assistance groups. So I've been a little bit long-winded here, but tell me where this idea came from. Tell me where you came from the beginning to now and where you're going with Conflicted the Game.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Do you want to speak a little to that, or do you want to go down that?
We kind of got started in it. A friend of ours sat down one day and just decided I got to do something. And he's a writer, and he just is really creative. He kind of thinks along those lines. He's a native of Brazil, but now has his American citizenship. And he sat down one day at lunch and started writing down some scenarios and said, what if I put this together and put together a deck of cards that had some questions on it, and it just kind of took off.
I was at Panda Express, and he pretty much wrote kind of like on a napkin, really started writing these down, then went home and started this was the initial 50 scenarios?
52.
52 scenarios that were launched out, and it just kind of went virally, posted that out, and there were people that would pick up the decks and they're like, if you're in the preparedness community, you have to get this deck. And we still have that today. We still find random people we've never met ever, and they're like talking about the conflicted scenarios, and they're using it, like you said, for their groups or their community to say, hey, this is a way to mentally prepare for this situation that you don't think you'd ever be in. Kind of what happened is Zay had come to Shanna, a friend, and basically was looking for some initial capital. His mom had been some health issues. We put some capital in. He needed some quick cash, so that helped to get him some quick cash. And like I think we were telling you last time, is that Shanna and I were driving to Idaho after we bought into the company.
We had 3 decks at the time.
3 decks, and Shanna opens. I said, well, why don't you open that? We'll read something while we drive. And she pulls open this one. Would you sell yourself to protect your children? It's one of the situations in the deck one. And I was like, what? Wait a second. What did I just buy into? I can't be a part of this. And then we had this conversation that I said, well, what would you do in this situation? And
I said, I'm all for it. If I'm protecting my kids, there's not much I wouldn't do to protect my kids.
Anyway, so I was like, man, I don't know this lady next to me. Would she do that? And I think it's interesting because when you're put in this situation, kind of like most of us don't want to kill. Well, most of us, I don't think, realize the level of what you go through to protect your child until you're actually put in a situation. I'm really curious. How many preparedness people, how many survivalists, how many military people, what would you go to lengths for? I think they've seen it. I think a lot of military people have seen those great things that most of us that are just normal citizens here that haven't had to fight, haven't had to put our life on the line. Many of those people have seen that, and they put themselves in a situation in war that then maybe changes that a little bit for them. And I think most moral compass would say absolutely not. And then again, the game is like another woman may say, absolutely, I'll die in the grave. But when they see their child being taken or raped or molested or whatever, I don't know. I think maybe that would change within all of us, protecting. And would God say, well, you didn't do your best to protect that? Maybe he say, you didn't. You were sent to that individual. You were sent as a father protector or mother protector, and you didn't protect them. What's the moral question? So that's really what this does. We don't say this is how to respond to it. We
don't give the answers.
We give everyone a situation, and then how would you go into that? And that's what Zay originally created, was just all these different, some were financial, some were a military situation, some were a hostage situation, some were for shooter, a lot of different situations that put you in that you don't think you'd ever be in, and then give yourself mental preparation because you've thought through it and you've said, hey, this is what I would do in this. That was kind of how we got involved in it. And then it went from there. And I don't remember what changed at that point. I think then I dug into it. It helped get me more prepared. We had, I think, like we told you, we had food preparation. We didn't have a lot of owned a gun and stuff, but we ended up getting more guns and more ammunition, more other preparations, more thinking like, well, if all of our supplies were taken away, what would we do? If the stores no longer existed, then what would we do? Wait a minute, if we can't grow food, do we have land? Right. And then we made that big trip and investment to come up to Idaho and move out of Utah, get out of the craziness that is happening there and get more rural so that we can kind of be protected and be surviving in our own community and economy. And like we told you, this is a way I've already started vetting some of my neighbors that are up in my community now, and already decided one of them is like, oh, I want to be on your land. And I'm like, telling her, I'm like, I don't think so. You didn't meet the test, brother.
This video is sponsored by William Tell Archery Supplies, home of the Mini Striker crossbow. Click the link in the description below to learn more. So do me a favor, is that deck open? Can you pick a random card out? And
I don't have this one.
Seven's open.
7 open.
Our audience has seen it a couple times on Survival Dispatch News, but I like to just hear a random question and then we can dissect it as far as not just getting the mental reps to consider this stuff in advance, but the moral compass that goes with these questions as well. We did one yesterday that was the bus full of convicts that had flipped over, and would you break the glass and rescue them? And if anybody hasn't seen that video, go back and watch it. It aired last Friday, but go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, here's one that this is under the Deck 7 financial collapse. What signs would you look for in order to help predict any incoming economic collapse? What are your thoughts on that? I asked the question, so maybe you ought to, what are your thoughts, Shanna?
Oh man, I think with everything that's happening in the world, you kind of look at how there's becoming such a differential, a gap in between. There's no more a middle class. It's lower class and upper class, and they're just trying to destroy that middle class. And I think those signs that you look for is how wide is that gap getting, and what are you doing to find a center of that, or get ahead, or be prepared for that, because it's going to happen.
You're thinking in macro terms. When you asked the question, Josh, I was thinking in more micro terms. I was thinking along the lines of, since I make no bones about it, that this is Obama's third term that he professed for years that he wanted, and Joe Biden's nothing more than a puppet. But anyway, under Obama's third term here, I think one of the things that I've noticed that speaks to that question, how not full buggies are when people come out of the grocery. So when people go grocery shopping today, they come out with far less, costing far more money. And the inflation, I see Joe Biden announced yesterday that he's beat inflation now. The guy's a pathological liar. Inflation's off the chain. We could go down a whole rabbit hole there on the consumer price index versus core inflation, which is just a bunch of subterfuge, for lack of a better term. But how would you, what signs are you looking for, Josh?
Well, I think I go down a lot of rabbit holes. I think one of the big things that we can look at right now is there are documents within the banking that have just been released recently that I think as of October, someone fact checker out there can probably correct me on the exact dates, but there was some documentation in for banks that basically relinquishes them from any commitment. And it's already been there because in the fine print, but they literally came out and beefed it up. So to me, it's kind of like the same thing they did with the vaccine. They made it so, and everyone talks about Reagan, how great that is. I think this we have to be very careful you have to see the collusion, and maybe he was proposed that so the vaccines have no recourse. I don't know if people realize that once you get that, there's no recourse. You can't go back. You can't sue Pfizer. You can't sue any of these pharmaceuticals, which is basically blank checks and money. And the same thing goes with the banking system. When you walk in one day, I think it's up to 9 months that the bank has to keep your funds, and you can't do anything. You sign that when you relinquish to put your capital in the bank. So what are you doing to pull your capital into land or into gold, silver, ammunition, other things that are going to give you an economy when that economy collapses? So to me, what are the signs? That's a big one. Another one I saw, it was a year ago, it was the FDIC, and they were talking about, well, the people who really matter, they can hire the lawyers for this. This is literally a video, and you're watching this going, is no one paying attention to this, guys? Like the normal public just are like, everything's great. I got my job. And when that switches on them and they don't have that, I think they're going to be like, whoa, what happened? And they're going to be crying and their phones won't work and want to be social media. So to me, back to just this question, signs of that's a big one. Those are some really big triggers. Plus, you already have, there's another lady I follow, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she basically is predicting and saying, look, the dollar, it has collapsed. It's just propped right now. And if you see the numbers, there's a timing when this will go when they want it to. So you have to understand, what are you doing to hedge against that?
Yeah, good point. I just back up and mention one thing. So the immunity, the civil lawsuit immunity that was given to the vaccine companies has been penetrated now. So there's a higher law that speaks to the adulteration of medications. So adulteration would mean adding something to a medication that's already been banned for whatever reason. So there were components of vaccines, I believe in the 1950s and earlier, that were eventually found to have really, really bad side effects. And they ended up sneaking into some of these COVID vaccinations, which have now been classified as adulterated. This is a really recent development, and the doors are now open to sue Pfizer and the other manufacturers as well because of this adulteration. It's not something that snuck into the medication. It's something that was purposely put in the medication, knowing full well that it wasn't allowed and that it had a history of causing problems in the past. So
that's awesome if they get that. Have there been any cases that have won it?
So no, I don't think it's worked its way through the court system any further than basically saying, yes, this particular compound is in these particular vaccinations. I don't think it was in the Johnson & Johnson, but I'm pretty sure it was in the Pfizer one. And because of that, this legal concept of adulteration is now in effect. So I know there's ambulance chasers now hunting people down to join class action lawsuits against them. So hopefully good wins at the end of the day on that particular topic. And hopefully YouTube doesn't smoke this video for medical misinformation as they're so fond of doing. So all right.
I didn't mention the wrong things. Sorry.
No problem at all. So you got a chance to mention a question from a financial deck. I'm just going to pick a random one from your original deck to get your thoughts on this. Your son or daughter died because someone who had a lot of food didn't want to share. They refused every attempt to barter with you, and you feel that they did it out of selfish greed more than anything. Would you plot revenge against them, or do they have the right to do as they please with their resources? That's a tough question.
I think I would. It is. And I almost can't put myself in that complete situation, because I look at it and go, I want to say what I would think right now, but I'm not experiencing that loss of a child. And for me, I would say I get that they can do what they want. They prepared, they have the resources, they have the things. But I would really hope that I could understand that enough to not plot a revenge, but to know that eventually they're going to have to come to me for something, I'm sure. Then what do I do? Is that where I take some revenge, or do I take the higher road and say, okay, I am going to hold you accountable for the death of this son or daughter. You need to understand that maybe I'm going to take a higher road, so maybe next time you can as well.
Not a bad answer.
Do you want premium ad-free content? Duh. Content that's not censored by big tech, of course. But with SD Insider, you can get behind the scenes and a whole lot more. Link in the description.
Josh, you want to take a stab?
So restate the question again.
Your son or daughter died because someone who had a lot of food didn't want to share. They refused every attempt to barter with you, and you feel they did it out of selfish greed more than anything. Would you plot revenge against them, or do they have the right to do as they please with their resources?
Well, I'm a big believer that everyone has the right to do with their resources. And I think that's where the big test in the future will come is being able to decipher wisdom in those situations, is to kind of like the story in the Bible times of cutting the child in half. Like, whose child is it? Are you going to decipher as to this is the child, the woman who loves it because she doesn't want the child to be cut in half, and the other lady who doesn't, she's split the baby in half, I'll take the other half. And then the wisdom says that this child is not theirs. I think food being withheld by someone and your family member dies, that if you're not prepared, I think that's coming to a lot of people. And they're going to be looking around going, why aren't you giving me your sustenance? You prepared, you saved, but why aren't you giving it to me? And you could say, why am I not giving it to 200 other people? And that will be a test. And I think there will have to be discernment for a lot of people in that situation. So to me, would I be bitter if it's back? This situation is, this happened to me, I didn't have the resources. And that could happen. Let's say you prepared everything and an earthquake hit, destroys your stuff, or military comes in, or heaven forbid, a government decides to siege their right under certain legal terms to take your stuff. And then you have to go to another camp and you're without, and they won't give you, and your child dies in that process. That'd be really hard. But I don't think I'd plot a revenge. In my heart would be calling to God, looking for manna from heaven, I guess. But I don't think I'd be plotting revenge against those people. I would be asking myself, why didn't I think a little more about my preparation mentally and physically before this got into this bad of a situation? And if it got so bad that I had nothing to do with it, and then I'm just at the helm of chaos, then even in that, you have to still seek wisdom, I think. But
fair enough. I'm a hardcore libertarian, lowercase L, not capital L. Those guys are loonies. So I firmly believe that we're currently witnessing an epic struggle between those of us who want to be left alone and those people who just can't leave other people alone. And those are the types of people that I believe would think that they were entitled to the other person's preps and food storage and would plot revenge because of this sense of entitlement that they have. This question is really easy for me to answer. I would never find myself in this situation. So even if I had been neglectful and hadn't stored food and everything else that I need for a SHTF situation, whatever it may be, I feel that I'm smart enough and resourceful enough that I would find a way to get some sort of food on the table. And I wouldn't be bartering with one individual neighbor. I would reach out to a larger network. I would find a way. If there was still wildlife available, I would go hunting. If we were anywhere near a body of water, I would find a way to go get fish out of that body of water. But I can't see that I would ever put myself in this situation. So interesting question, though. And
you'd be getting your bow out, right?
Well, I got back into bows last year and hadn't shot them since I was in scouts as a young lad. And of course, I've got no depth perception. This is a prosthetic eye, and I've got some ongoing issues with my good eye. But I also have absolutely zero quit in me. If you challenge me with something and I have to put a million reps in, I will put a million reps in to make sure I overcome. So for the past year, I've been working with my archery skills, and it started out again with no depth perception, where at 75 feet, I could barely hit a 4x8 sheet of plywood consistently, to the point now where, again, I'm not an expert archer, but I can put everything on a target this big from 75 feet away consistently. So I'd be using something at my disposal. Could be a bow, could be a crossbow, could be a firearm. Could be
I think you're right. I think Chris wins the card. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would be like you said. Now that you talk about it, I'd be seeking for other opportunities off the land or whatever else. But I would also distance myself from that individual. They wouldn't be a part of my group or community any further. So
it's hard to say from somebody who has that mentality they may exhaust their stores and then feel that they're entitled to whatever you have. Hard to say. There's definitely some crazy people, and that question's not the most extreme. And you guys know the decks much better than I do. But what it does speak towards is the moral compass and what comes out of it for people like this. Again, we've mentioned a couple cards on Survival Dispatch News. Going forward, with your permission, we want to ask a question at the beginning of Survival Dispatch News and then circle back to it at the end of the video and have our panel that's on that particular day answer the question. But I can really see how some people would answer these questions in such a way that would really indicate that they don't have good moral fiber. And I can give you a very firsthand example of that. We have seen an alarming increase over the past year of comments on our videos from people saying, I don't prep. I'm not going to prep. When SHTF happens, I'm just going to take whatever I want by using my gun to threaten people. And some of that is just internet bravado, but some of it is people actually telling you who they are. And there's evil people amongst us at all times. And I can foresee people doing that, where they're essentially marauders taking from others, because we're back to this sense of entitlement and whatnot. And I guarantee you, if those individuals who've left those types of comments played your game, it will probably be an eye opener for anybody in their circle to say, whoa, you don't think I really want to have this guy in my tribe, sort of thing. But I can tell you right now, like, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but Mike Sterling loves that aspect of this.
It really is one of the better aspects of the game is a vetting tool in my mind. And then just personal mental preparation. It does so much I think, again, you turn the corner, and when we got 52 scenarios in a deck that we can help bring you in times that many, there's a lot of scenarios, a lot of information to talk about. So just
for the benefit of our audience who either haven't seen it already or aren't familiar with your game. So you have this deck of cards, board game aside, you have one of these decks. What's the process to play the game?
So just like we did just now, you basically can pull open the game and you can play it. Like I said, that's a queen, right? Let's see, or not a queen, it's a queen. You got your ace. So you can play these as basically playing cards, but you can also play them as the game. Just like you said, we pull a card out of the deck and you start asking the questions, and then whoever has the most of these at the end of your time playing the game wins as, I guess, a leader within a group, or someone that people trust, or someone that maybe you go, wait a minute, they had a lot of really good insight. What's Chris doing with his mental preparation that maybe I don't have? Or maybe it's some of these other guys that are part of your team that you start talking to, or Mike, like you brought up Mike out there. There's different people that we all kind of appreciate. We kind of listen because they've had real life experience into some of these situations that we may never have experienced. So that then helps you to kind of say, who is that leader among us that could take us through these catastrophic, because there's always going to be that in any situation. If you don't have some form of leadership already established as to, hey, we're in a group, a community of 20, 30 people, but we have 7 or so of us that are like that military, go out and help. But then you still have families. You got to think about this. Like, if this ever gone down to this, how do you take care? Yeah, you can take care of 7 guys, but what about the kids and all the crying babies? Do you allow them? This game really gives you a picture of what that looks like. And I think a lot of guys say, I can throw on a deer on my back and me, and well, can you do that with a 5-year-old on your hip? Are you going to allow the 5-year-old on your hip? What are you going to do with the 5-year-old? You're just going to let it die? Is it relation to you? There's so many of those things. I've been backpacking with my kids when I took 6 years old with a pack that literally weighed it out at 25 pounds for a 6-year-old. Wow. My boy,
a little boy.
No, it was 30 pounds. Kiddo's pack was, I think, 33 pounds. I measured all their packs, and I literally on that trip ended up packing food out of their packs because we went up into the Uintas. Okay. It was a 12 miles in. So you got to think, when they're 6 years old, a 12-year-old child, 6 to 12, going back in backcountry with just dad, no mom. And what does that look like? Like, can they pack their own water? I made them go down the stream. They had to pump their own water out. They had to prepare the meal. I'm like, no, you're preparing it. When my boy got his head cut open, he fell. His pack was too heavy. So there were a lot of things in that process. I was like, yeah, they can handle this. And going 12 miles, you got to think of a kid in a day. Can they handle a 12-mile hike? If you're trying to distance yourself from an enemy coming at you, how fast can you move 12 miles with a child on your hip?
Yeah.
All that stuff changes. So anyway,
That's a great scenario, because you reminded me as I was flicking through the decks that there was a question I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, what type of model would you employ for your group? Would you have somebody who is the elected leader, or would it be more of a meritocracy where everybody
have that in-
where everybody got to vote on it? And I thought that was an interesting question, because I don't think meritocracies don't work, number one. Number two, there's a reason survival teams are 7 or less individuals. Once you get past 7 people in a group, you invariably end up with too many chiefs and not enough Indians, and you get factions and you get headbutting and all that kind of stuff. So it raised an interesting question that we have discussed on Survival Dispatch News, that if you truly want to be prepared for a post SHTF world, these are questions you need to answer now in advance and review with whoever's in your group. Okay, if this happens, this is going to be who's in charge of what, and these are going to basically be the laws of the land, so to speak, for lack of a better term. Because if you think you're going to do it after an SHTF event, it's highly likely that you'll fail. And you will have people who will go along with it because maybe you have resources, but their heart's not really in it. And it's one of the problems that I personally have with mutual assistance groups. Almost any time that you form a group of individuals like that, you end up with a group of people who do absolutely nothing and a group of people who do everything. And the people who do everything eventually resent the people who do nothing and sit around twiddling their thumbs. And it's not an easy thing to do, to manage a larger group of people, especially if you haven't already covered all this stuff in advance. And even more so, do you share the same values and beliefs? Because if you don't share the same values and beliefs, diversity is a massive weakness. Diversity is not a strength. Diversity of values and beliefs, when you put people together in that, all you're asking for is confrontation. And it always happens. History has shown this over and over again. I get off that soapbox because I could go really deep in it.
Well, I think you're right on, Chris, too. Is like, I think there was a document out there with Rush Limbaugh that talks about this. Like in the beginning times, they tried to establish, when they first came to colonies, it was like they pulled their stuff together. Was it going to survive? There were some freeloaders in that group that weren't providing skills. They didn't bring anything to the table. They weren't doctor or whatever. They just thought they could sit around and eat all the maize from everyone else. And it ended up collapsing in that system. And instead of being in this capitalist system where people are providing, you're doing something, she's doing something, everyone has to have a purpose. Back to your thought, and this is another question maybe out there, I don't know if it's in one of our decks or not, but just came to mind, is like, so how does, and I think this does apply to a lot of families out there too. If you have a family and you're saying the best groups are in groups of 7, how does that apply? Like, if you have a family, our family's family of, right?
We have 6 children.
6 kids. That's our group. How's that surviving in this post-apocalyptic world, right? Like, do you bring, there's a leadership in military experience. My kids all have knowledge and understanding of how to shoot, and my boys are very talented. They're older. They're not adult age, so their mentality isn't quite as sharp as it would be in a couple of years from now, but they're still pretty keen at a young age and have had good training already. So how do people run those type of groups?
Yeah, well, I would clarify my comments in that when you're in a survival team situation and you have 7 individuals and you have somebody who's the squad leader, whatever you want to call it, it's not hard to make a group like that work, who's trained together and share those same values and beliefs. But when you go beyond a group size of 7, the requirement to share common values and beliefs becomes more and more important. Because if you don't share those values and beliefs, and you now have some sort of a rule structure in place, you're not going to get buy-in from people who don't have the exact same or very similar values and belief systems. So when you go to grow a larger group, my point really is you've really got to do your due diligence in advance and not after the fact. So in other words, we're in this SHTF situation. You have your family and maybe a handful of other individuals that are part of your group, and somebody shows up, a small group of people, 2, 3, 5 people, whatever it may be, and they need food, they need shelter, and all of those sort of things. Do you let them in because it's the Christian thing to do, or do you have such limited amount of stores that the problem is you could let them in and they're selling you a false bill of goods. And next thing you do is you find out that they have a criminal mindset or they're violent or whatever the case may be. My point really was, if you're going to grow the group to any type of size, you have to have this stuff established in advance, and you have to have agreement in advance. And let me just add one quick anecdotal example, Josh, before I lose my train of thought on this. I ran the CEO exchange for University of Central Florida for years here. It was a program where they brought in CEOs from companies that were headquartered in Central Florida that did $5+ million a year in revenue, had, I think it was 20 plus employees at the time. And the group had thrived for years, but then it died. And I got called in to kind of clean up what was left and hopefully resurrect it, which I did. One of the things I did is I went back to all the people who left and I said, would you mind telling me why you left the group? And one of the comments that was pretty common amongst all of them was, I had no say of who was in the group. For example, there was one example, or one case, I should say, where an individual was unilaterally brought into the group by the facilitator. And that particular individual was a contractor for one of the other people in the group. And there was all sorts of confidential information shared. Well, the first person ended up leaving, and the comment to me was, that guy is a contractor who works for me, and I don't want him knowing all my confidential information. It's not fair that I didn't have a say in it. So when we restructured the rules, what it basically was is that if anybody has somebody, a candidate that you're proposing to join our group, it has to be unanimous from all the existing members that they're allowed in, but there also has to be a cap. We set the cap at 15 because we polled, everybody was in there, and they felt that beyond 15, it was hard to build a relationship, a confidential relationship with their peers. There's just too many people. And then the next piece to it was, somebody comes in, they may be a great person, but there may be a conflict of interest with somebody else. And it only took one person to say, I'm not comfortable with them in the group, or we even voted anonymously sometimes. That's the kind of lengths that you have to go to if you want to ensure your success with a group. You can't just say, oh my goodness, these people are my doorstep, and yes, the Christian thing to do is to share with them, and then find out that you've let the proverbial fox into the henhouse.
Yeah, that's one of the decks, one of the questions
that
on
is
the deck.
that is one of the questions, or I think we have it varied in different ways.
Yeah.
I swear I didn't steal that from you, Deck.
Well, and you're right on. So here's a situation that maybe people aren't thinking of right now with these men, women, and children, and mostly men that are crossing the borders. Could maybe these women and children be used as just that? I think military guys aren't saying it out there, but I'm sure if you talk to the Mike Glovers and stuff, they're probably like, oh, like this definitely could be that these women and children are the sympathy cards to get into your camps at some point, where they then pillage and take all. And that definitely could happen. And this is where a discernment and a prior plan as to how you vet and how you organize your community is able to. I had a friend, Colby, a couple years ago. He's a huge prepper. We didn't know this until we got taught. We'd been vetting each other. We didn't know we were vetting each other. He starts telling me stuff, and I'm like, oh. And then he starts telling me, and now we've become extremely good friends, and we still discuss things. But I asked him if I could be in his group, and he says, no, Josh, the group's already established. So he's already had rules. He already stands. And he also says, you're not close enough proximity to me that I really have any benefit, nor could I really assist you based on your location. So that was important for me to think when I said, well, what if I have to come towards you? And he's like, probably not, because we've already discussed this as a group. So it was valuable because it was something like, well, if I came into proximity of him at some point from some disaster that caused us to have to move, would that change? I would have to understand his group better to understand if that was even a plausible thing, because he had prepared so much. So,
yeah. Well, kudos to him and their group for establishing their parameters and sticking to their parameters. I refer back to that just as expectation management. You set everybody's expectations right out of the gate. These are the right engagement.
And I thought I had really good qualities, business, not a lot of other things, the skill sets, physical stature. I can run off like 3 hours. I'm like the clone. They really should like put me in for like military testing for sleep. Yeah. Shanna could tell you, I can literally run off like 2 to 3 hours of sleep. Nice. Still full force, which not many people can do.
For sure.
If they find that in my genes, are going to want to take my genetics and reduplicate it. So
no, that's definitely a great quality to have. So before we wrap up here, I know you mentioned earlier you've got some more decks coming. Can you give us any idea of the high level overview of what to expect?
I would just say a lot of the decks that we have will be very relevant to a lot of the new things that are happening, I think will be very, very helpful for what people are going to be experiencing. Like I said, I think when our previous discussion before this was a lot of our belief in God has kind of helped us to kind of dictate a lot of what we try and produce and do, and just preparing and helping people understand that there's more things they need to mentally and get right with. And number one, like I said, is get right with God, and then all the other preps come after. But the new ones, I think we got a lot of cool ones that are coming out. It'll be fun for the audience to kind of delve into. So
right now they can go to conflictedthegame.com. How much do the decks sell for again?
$18.95.
$18.95 for and the board game.
We have 2 versions of the board game.
This is it right here. Kind of what's up me. Sorry, Shannon. Just bash you in the head. It's a heavy duty game. This game's thick. Like it's 5 pounds. It's like, maybe I'll just show you. Have you seen this? Have you opened it?
Well, I was going to say before we wrap up, maybe you could give me or give our audience, I should say, the Cliff Notes version on it. I do have it. Shannon was nice enough to send it, but we haven't got deep into it. We're more familiar with the card decks right now.
You want us to do another time where we talk about the board game later, because it's really
the board game kind of came about as we looked at some of the scenarios, and people, I think, sometimes it was almost too much for them. Like, I don't know what I would do in that situation. We kind of put the board game together to say, okay, build that situation, build a leader, and find a place to survive, and find what people you want to bring into your group.
Ebola. We actually had Ebola. This was before 2020, by the way.
Okay.
So we had the Ebola, and it says the virus is everywhere. I don't know why, but everyone's dying.
We kind of tried to put like a humorous quote on each card.
This is nuclear attack. Is that a mushroom cloud? And we're just always trying to find something. And then this was like your leaders, you get to keep your leader, but everyone else is destroyed within your camp. So unless you had a bunker, if you're in a bunker, then you had survival through that nuclear. So there are things within it. If your camp was by the ocean, you were destroyed.
If a tsunami came in,
we try to make it as realistic as possible. If you had a shelter that was compromised and could be overtaken by a government, then it'd be destroyed. So
if you had a shelter that couldn't hold many people, you can't bring a bunch of people into your camp if you can't sustain them. So look at the resources you have. And also we made it so that your grandma next door is probably not going to be able to shoot an AR gun
or run a helicopter.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we try to keep that in there and keep that in mind. And
anyway, this is it's a full-on booklet of how to play. It's got a lot of stuff in here.
But there's a video on how to play, and also you can message us on Facebook and we answer questions as fast as we can.
There's grandma. Is she going to survive she's in her bathrobe? Is she going to survive the apocalypse? You got Jade here, who's a little more prepped and got a gas mask and or hip gun. She's got, I think, her AR there. And then you've got this prepper guy's kind of our mask. This is him on a larger version of the same guy. But
right on. You actually hit on something that I made a note on and didn't circle back on in the last part of the conversation, was that for your group's compensation, it's actually really interesting that you've got grandma there. One consideration is injured, disabled, and seniors, that our expectations have to be realistic, but we can't leave people behind who are a part of our family, part of our tribe. And you probably have to, they should put some thought towards it. Not everybody who's in your group will have all of the physical attributes and skills and whatnot, but those senior citizens in particular probably have a whole ton of knowledge that the younger generations don't have, and it's invaluable. Imagine the internet's gone. Most people don't have a library of books. Like when I grew up, we had the encyclopedia, and every year you got a new update to the encyclopedia and that was the internet for us when we grew up. But point being is that, and a really important consideration is injured, disabled, and senior citizens. They have something to offer, and they should not be left behind.
I think that is again, this is a group has to think through that process. Like you're bringing in grandma.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book, you probably read it, 1 Second After. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't read it, but I do have the book.
Okay. It's an awesome book. I recommend anyone to read that, especially if they're in preparation, because it does just that. The nursing homes, they're without power. If your grandpa and grandpa are down in the nursing home now, what's your plan to get them out?
Yeah.
What if the government sanctions that you can't get them out? Are you going to stay there and fight for them? Again, these are a lot of these other situation scenarios that are more in depth for chaos that we'll be coming out with in the future that I think people really need to vet and think through. But yeah,
I was just going to say there's an old adage that is very germane to the comment that you just made. And it is if you fail to plan, you've planned to fail.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So this stuff is absolutely critical as far as your success would be concerned. And let's be clear, SHTF doesn't mean that we're in a Teotihuacan situation, doesn't mean it's Armageddon. It could be something like us here in Florida getting hammered by a Cat 5 hurricane that nukes everything from power, water, food supply, fuel supply for extended periods of time, because we've lived through it. We live through it every year. And we have seen some really crappy things from humanity during those type of scenarios.
And that's really, I think, where people need to take this too. Like, I think you'd mentioned a lot of your people are urban survivors. Where are they at? Like what could affect them in New York? Let's just say there's another chaos and they shut down and they say you're not going out of your house. What are your restraints? Years ago, I was at a preparedness convention. We were asked to come to this thing, and it was like in the beginning of all this, and I felt like a celebrity. People are coming out.
Right on.
You're conflicted. Oh man, your stuff is the best. And I met a lady there who had been a first responder to Hurricane Katrina. And she says, you have no idea. When I went in there, I was trying to help these people. They were seeking they were shooting at us.
Yeah.
She goes, and we were trying to help. So again, her job was to come in and help. That's what she signed up for. And a lot of these people, they make a government decision. They're going to say, we're going to be part of helping in for this relief. What are your mental preparations at that point? What have you done to protect yourself? And she was having people shoot at her, other people. She had one girl, they found that she had no family. They had no plan. The family didn't have any records to take the girl to. And she literally was tied to a tree by her dad to save her life and her mom and dad. And they never found the mom and dad.
Wow.
They're gone. And the only person they could find for the girl to go with was a school teacher that had survived. And she took her in, but they didn't have a plan to do that. So this mom and dad had no way to take care of this child in the future. Like what's the plan? No grandma and grandpa. They're all dead.
Again, if you plan to fail, or if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I have an acquaintance who was a former military, organized a convoy to take water and food to Houston when they got hit by Hurricane Harvey, whatever that was, 7-8 years ago. And when they crossed the state line from Louisiana into Texas, just east of Brownsville, they were stopped by state troopers and were told point blank, if you proceed beyond this point, there's nobody coming to help you. If you get in trouble, you're on your own. And they didn't get just past the other side of Brownsville, so they still weren't in Houston yet, and they came under fire. And they had, I don't know, a dozen trucks in their convoy with trailers that they were towing full of water and all kinds of stuff. And these were people trying to assault them to steal the resources that were being brought in, to steal the food and water. So again, we're never more than 3 missed meals away from anarchy. Take food out of the equation. I give you one more quick anecdotal example and then we'll wrap up. But the first week of the lockdown, so we didn't really have lockdowns here in Florida. Basically, it was maybe a week and a couple days sort of thing. And then everybody was like, yeah, we're not going to do this. We're going to continue living life. But I pulled into a 7-Eleven that I used to pull in all the time on my way to work, and immediately was struck by there was nobody in the parking lot. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm the only vehicle there. There's nobody walking around. It was really, really spooky. So when I'm at a gas station, I'm always in condition orange pretty much, because I've had a couple incidents there. So I'm never more than, if I don't have my pistol on my hip, it's sitting directly in front of me in my truck sort of thing. And this guy pulls in a small car. He's a few pumps down. He gets out of his car. He's fixing to start pumping. This guy comes running from behind the 7-Eleven, tackles him and starts just wailing on him. And so now I'm reaching for my phone and my pistol and fixing to call 911, and Smokey Bear pulls in, sheriff pulls in, and he slams it in park, jumps out of the car, grabs this guy, And as he's trying to handcuff the guy is screaming at him, I haven't eaten in a week. I just need some food. He's cussing, of course, while he's saying all this. But the whole thing was based on him saying he had no food, he hadn't eaten in days, and he was just looking to get some food. Now, obviously, he didn't go the right way and assaulted the first guy. But I called my wife and I said, hey, don't stop on your way to the office. From now on, if you need fuel, we'll go get fuel together, because this is where people's heads are going to now.
Absolutely. They get desperate and then they start acting like zombies.
Yeah, being gas station ready is a thing. Really appreciate y'all's time on this. Let's plan on getting back together again at some point in the future and going through the board game and doing it justice. It's just the card games are really, really cool. They're way more than just a novelty or a novel idea, as I initially thought. And we really appreciate you sending the decks. And conflictedthegame.com, people can order stuff there. There's more coming. I guess that's it.
Thanks so much for your time, Chris. We really appreciate it, and all the insight too. I think that's really what I love about this, and podcasts are just talking to people, because we learned so much from your experience and from the community. Deck 2 was kind of created that way too. It was on people feedback in the community of preparedness of what they were, situations that they thought we could be faced with, and they put them forward to us, and we put a bunch of those in deck. Is this deck 2?
Deck 2 and deck 5.
And I think that is a really important thing, because we do learn as we interact and talk to new people. I've always found in business it's the same way. The more we can network and communicate and talk to other people, we become stronger and better, because there's things that other people know that we don't, that we can always learn and become better from.
I always try to distill things down to a simplistic level that my mind can process, but by engaging your audience like that to come up with that next product, that to me, that's business 101, because you play to your audience, and that's how you get traction, really. So it's a smart decision on y'all's part. All right. Thanks again.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Chris.
Become a Survival Dispatch Insider. We bring together survival enthusiasts and preppers to share knowledge and skills, which means you can enhance your preparedness for emergencies and ensure the safety of your community. The results you'll get: improve your emergency preparedness by learning skills and strategies from experienced preppers. Build lasting connections with like-minded individuals to share your passion for safety and readiness. Access a wealth of knowledge and resources to assist you in protecting you and your community in certain situations. Go to survivaldispatch.com to get started.